for bailing us out, letting us know that Go9 is on infrastructure, innovation, and industry. Thank you very much for that. So just to start, just to give us, actually, I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Yeah. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So part of things we talk about in this session, we will talk about what an overview of infrastructure is. We will also do some case studies. And then after talking about the general overview of SDG Go9, we would now talk about the current status and the scenario of Go9 in other parts of the world, or like globally, and also talk about it in the Nigerian context. And then at the end of this session, you would be able to reflect and think about what you can do as an individual to move infrastructure development forward. So the SDG9 is a part of the UN 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. And the aim of this goal is to build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and also to foster innovation. In reality, every successful economy, every functioning society needs infrastructure to thrive. There is no society without infrastructure. And it seems like a very big word, like, oh, so what is infrastructure really? Seems like a very big word. But at the center of this is that there is no country, any economy, or any society that can grow without infrastructure. It is a prerequisite for economic growth, for prosperity, and for improved livelihood. It is one major ingredient for growth, for social and for economic development. And just take a minute to think about what a society would look like without infrastructure. Think about the electricity that powers your phone. Most of us are joining through one device or the other, whether your laptop, your tablet, or your mobile phone. There is electricity that powers your devices to function. Or think about the roads that lead you to work every day, or to your place of study, or to wherever you do business. Or think about the internet services that enables you to connect to the world. So just as we rightly said at the beginning, people were talking about where they've joined from Abia, from Borno, from Sokoto, from England. People have joined from different places, and the internet services that connect us together. So infrastructure at the very basic is the bedrock of every functioning society, and every society needs infrastructure to function. So what is infrastructure, essentially? One way to think about infrastructure is it's a facility. It could be a facility, it could be a structure, and it could also be systems that support the society, or support the economy to continue to move ahead and to grow. But infrastructure as itself, it is not just one thing. It's a combination of different things. So two ways of understanding infrastructure is to understand as an asset and to understand as a service. Assets mean physical structures like your road, your bridges, your dams, the electricity grid, the water plants. And for those of us who come from Nigeria, we are very familiar with the national grid because we've had so many news recently about the national grid collapsing and things like that. So the asset itself, it's a physical structure, whereas the services are more around the benefits that you gain from those assets. So you need for instance, like a dam, for instance, that's a physical structure. You need a dam to generate electricity. What you get as a service is electricity as a service. You need an hospital. An hospital in this sense is an asset. It's a physical structure. But what you get as a service is healthcare, for instance. So these are two ways you can understand infrastructure. It could be an asset, it could be a service, and there is no clear line or distinction between both. both of them are interconnected. You need assets to power the services. For the services to function, you'd also need the assets that support those services. So you cannot have healthcare without an hospital, for instance. So one of the ways that we can understand infrastructure development is to see it as an asset, see it as a service. But also we can, beyond this asset services distinction, we also have category of infrastructure, and you can categorize infrastructure under two broad categories: physical and social infrastructure. So, going back to what I was saying at the start, so physical structures like road, your bridges, your grid, they're like the physical infrastructure. The social ones are really the things that enable well-being, that enable standard of living. And like I said, just like the asset and services divide, there is no clear line between physical and social infrastructure. They overlap. There is no clear-cut distinction. They are very much intersecting. So you need both of them together. So when you think about social infrastructure, they're like the things that enable your standard of living, like clean water, education, healthcare, things that enable your standard of living. But physical structure, as they are like the physical element, the things that you can see, they are very tangible. You can see them, you can touch them. You can't touch healthcare, for instance, but you can touch and you can see things like roads and bridges and dams and things like that. So I hope that this gives a basic understanding of, when we talk about infrastructure, what exactly we mean by that. So why is infrastructure important? Think about this for a minute. We all talk about infrastructure. Infrastructure affects every one of us. It affects our lives. And although we have divided this into economic benefits and social benefits, the importance of infrastructure cannot be simplified, or it cannot be overstated. Infrastructure is very important for every aspect of life and every aspect of society. For instance, there are economic benefits to having infrastructure, such as increasing trade, supporting economic activities, increasing productivity, creating jobs, and attracting investment. This seems like a very big and grand idea. But let's think about this. For you to get to your places of work or economic activity or business, you need to go through a particular road network. So we need roads. You also need things like electricity to increase and enhance your productivity. Think about it. If you have, imagine like you show up to work one day and you have like list of things to do, or you have exams coming up and you have to study, because I understand that we have a very diverse group of people who have joined today, and and then you have like exams to study for, but there is no power. How do you study and prepare? How do we power our industries without infrastructure? And if we cannot power our industries, where will the jobs come from? If the industries that we have, if they come to a halt because there is no power supply for them, there is, enabling infrastructure, basically, how would we create jobs? And also, as a country, how would we attract investment? No one wants to trade or do business with countries where there is no enabling infrastructure. We sometimes have this argument also at work, where we talk about where you want a foreign investor, for instance, to come into the country to establish a business. But then investors start to question themselves, like, if I come to this country, there is no power supply. For you to be able to run this business, you probably need to use generator, like pay a very high price for diesel and things like that. So it discourages even investors who want to come and do business. And so by improving infrastructure, we are going to gain lots of economic benefit, which goes around like trade. Even like trade relies on moving people from one place to the other. It relies on moving goods and services, that you can move, that you can be a farmer somewhere and you need to get your farm produce to the urban centers, to the markets. You need infrastructure to be able to support and do these things. So without infrastructure, we are not going to grow the economy. But outside of the economy, let's look at the social benefits, access to basic amenities, increasing standard of living. Basically, if you do not have good infrastructure, adequate infrastructure, you're not going to be able to live the quality of life that you should. Because all of your daily realities is shaped by no power supply, bad roads, and things like that, no access to clean water and things like that. And that affects your standard of living, your quality of life. And also, by improving infrastructure, we are going to reduce inequality, because there are people who are in underserved communities who cannot even access basic things like clean water. And so if we fix that aspect of infrastructure, we are going to bridge the gap in inequality, in sense of people don't need to move to urban center before they can have decent life, before they can live well. If we're able to build infrastructure and also like cascade it down into not just in the urban centers alone, but also even to the grassroots, then we're going to be bridging the inequality gap. So these are some of the reasons why infrastructure is very important for us as a society and also for us as a country. And these are things that we need to actively think about. We need to actively think about on how we can, for us to have sustainable development, we need to actually close the infrastructure gap so we can have all of this. Because all of these things, they fit and they sit under so many SDGs. If we go around the room and I ask you, so what SDG are you most passionate about? You can literally connect the SDG that you're working on or you're passionate about to fixing infrastructure, such that if you fix infrastructure, you are very likely to be able to solve that problem or close the gap in that area. So now, beyond why infrastructure is important, let's just talk about the factors of good infrastructure. How do you know that infrastructure is good? One thing you should have at the back of your mind is there is good infrastructure and there is bad infrastructure. This is important for us as citizens, because it is not enough for the government to promise you infrastructure, to say, if you elect us, I'll build road. It is not enough. You need to ask, what is the quality of the infrastructure that is being promised? We need to ask ourselves, is it enough that the government, say, if you elect us, we are going to do this? Is it enough? There are certain metrics for assessing whether infrastructure is good enough. And the reason why this is also very important is that there is infrastructure that can boost development, but it's infrastructure that will not do much. It is good to have, it is nice to have, but in the grand scheme of things, it hasn't really solved the problem. And so when we talk about what good infrastructure is, these are some of the factors, some of the things that you need to think about. Is it accessible? Is it reliable? Is it sustainable? And is it resilient? And I'm going to explain this one after the other. So when we talk about accessible infrastructure, what we mean is that infrastructure needs to promote a people-first outcome. People must be at the center of infrastructure. You're building for people. You're not just building for the sake of building and just tick, like your governor is not just going to build infrastructure and say, oh, check, tick the box, we've done this, the end. You have to think about it like, in building this thing, does it help the people? A few weeks ago, it was in the news that a state in Nigeria was bidding to build an airport. And the question that I had was, an infrastructure-driven person is, what is the goal for this? A sheer majority of the people in that state do not need an airport. They're not going to use that airport. But that's not even just, what we think about when we talk about infrastructure being accessible. It's about asking ourselves, can people use it? Does it benefit the people? Because good infrastructure must eliminate existing barriers. Good infrastructure must take account of the people that is being built for. One important element of accessible infrastructure is that it must bridge existing divide. For instance, the divide between rural and urban communities. it is not enough if all that infrastructure does is only to benefit people in the urban centers. How about people in villages? How about people in rural communities? Do they also have access? Do they also have equal access? So it is not enough for infrastructure to benefit only a set of people. Can people with disability use it? Does it also benefit, when we talk about gender, does it only benefit a particular gender and another gender cannot use it? So you need to think about, does it promote a people first outcome? That's the first thing. The second one is reliability. Infrastructure must function consistently. You must be able to trust that this thing will work. Consistency and efficiency. Coming back to an example that I gave at the start about the national grid crisis, a lot of the time we hear that, oh, the national grid has collapsed and then there is blackouts in the country. Ideally, this should not be the case, because you should be able to rely on the fact that an infrastructure that has been built can serve people consistently under any circumstance and under any situation. That it doesn't serve people consistently, it's a failure in the infrastructure design. And it simply means that we need to close that gap. So you must be able to trust that something that has been built will function when you need it, that you can have access to the road, you can have access to power supply as and when you need it. So if the infrastructure asset or service is not reliable, then it is not good enough. And then the third element is around sustainability. In building infrastructure, you need to keep in mind the future. It's important that you think about what's going to happen years from now, what's going to happen. Will building this infrastructure really affect the environment years after now, or will it create some form of damage to the environment? And we wrote an article recently, we published an article recently at Infra Spotlight earlier in the year, where we're talking about how you need to test whether an infrastructure is good enough. And something about sustainability is this. I'm also wrote an article on environmental impact assessment. So before you can even start to build infrastructure, you need to think about what's the impact on the environment. Will it release toxins? Will it contribute to more emissions in the environment? Because it is not just enough to build for now. How about in the future? What's the point of building something now and in 10, 20 years is going to affect the community that surrounds that infrastructure and the people within that area? So without giving a specific example, but I think it was just a few years ago where a particular refinery was going to be built somewhere in Nigeria. And I remember that environmental activists asked the question, like, the location of this refinery, is it ideal? Because what's going to happen 50 years after now, like when you've built this refinery and it's in full operation, is the location not going to affect the people who will be living in that area? And these things happen not just in Nigeria, but also in other parts of the world where a power plant or an hydro plant has been built somewhere, but because of the location, years after, it started to cause damage to the environment, people started to like fall sick more. And then, so in the end, there was no point. So when we build infrastructure, we need to build with the future in mind. It has to be sustainable. It has to contribute to sustainability, not draw the environment backward. And finally, one factor or one critical element of good infrastructure is it will be resilient, in that it will be built to last, not just for today, but for the future. And this goes more around when we plan infrastructure, we need to think about whether that infrastructure can withstand shocks, whether it can withstand pressure. With so much natural disasters also like happening in different parts of the world, from earthquake to flooding and things like that, in building infrastructure, you want to ensure that it's future proof, that regardless of whatever shock or pressure would come, that it would withstand pressure. And if you're thinking about why this is important, and it's true, we cannot preempt natural disaster. You can't tell that maybe although science has evolved to the point that you can use some scientific tools and devices to be able to test for future hazards. But the truth is that ordinarily, you can't tell if 10 or 20 years from now, there will be a flood somewhere. What you can do is that in designing infrastructure, you want to think about if that happens, in the unlikely or likely event that happens, are we still going to have this infrastructure standing? Because in every natural disaster, apart from the loss of lives, we also have loss of property. And that loss of property draws the economy back. In 2023, just last year, Morocco experienced earthquake, and the amount of money that was required to rebuild Morocco to recover from that natural disaster was going into billions of dollars. This money is money that could have been channeled into another area of development. Imagine if that money was spent elsewhere to like alleviate poverty, improve education, improve healthcare, other things that the money could have been spent on, but instead that money was spent on rebuilding and building back, recovering from the natural disaster because of the amount of loss of property that the country experienced. And for us to prevent against this sort of loss, when we build infrastructure, we need to keep in mind that infrastructure needs to be built to last. Don't just build a shabby road because you've promised your constituency that you're going to build a road if they elect you. Don't just build anyhow. And this is something that we see often in maybe in Nigerian context also. We see it very often where people just build anything for the sake of building and campaigning and say, oh, but I built this thing, even though it does not serve anybody, but you want to show your constituency that, oh, well, I've built it and I've built it to the end. It is not enough. There are factors for good infrastructure. So I'm going to pause here and we're going to do some case studies, actually 2 case studies, to give you an intro into these case studies, just to make this workshop a little bit more practical. I'm going to display a scenario. Please bear in mind that these scenarios, they are fictitious scenarios. They do not exist in real life. We might see examples of them, but they are not real life situation. The names in these case studies, they are fictitious. So I will display the case study, the first and the second one, for like 2 minutes, and I want us to think about it and discuss this. The aim of this is what we're going to ask based on what we've talked about, factors of good infrastructure. I need you guys to read this case study and let's discuss if this would count as good enough infrastructure. Like, so if you as a citizen were to see this scenario play out in real life, would you say this is good enough? If you say it's good enough, why is it good enough? If you say it's bad, it's not good enough, why is it not good enough? So are we ready? So the first case study is this. I'm going to read it out and ask us. So if you want to contribute, you can just come off mute because I won't be able to see if you're raising your hand. So just come off mute and tell us what you think about this situation. So the first one is a new road network has been constructed. It now connects on the average 9 different communities to the metropolis, the urban center. 2 of which are rural communities that previously had no means of connecting with the urban center for over 15 years, except for a narrow footbridge. The new road network now allows workers and entrepreneurs to easily get to their places of work. As part of the constructed road network, a mass transport plan was introduced to release over 100 BRT buses for ease of transportation at affordable prices. These buses have no ramps for wheelchair access and no audio programming to announce bus stops. In your opinion, is this good enough? If yes, please tell us why this is good enough. If not, tell us why it's not. So over to you guys. Who is going first?
I think it's not good enough.
Okay, why?
Yes, because I believe we've reached the agreement that infrastructure should be inclusive. You understand, and from the last paragraph, it has stated that these buses do not have ramps for wheelchair, and of course we know that ramps make accessibility easier for persons with disability. You understand, people that use wheelchairs, and as well, it does not have audio programming to announce bus stops. And these audio programmings go a long way in helping um those that are impaired, that cannot hear, you understand, that have impairment. So for me, I think it's not good enough. It's good that it connects to rural communities and all that, but it's not good enough. That it could still be better if they should factor in this accessibility factors. So it should be inclusive. Every if they should do their assessment, I think inclusion is a big part of infrastructure. If a particular segment of the demographic is not fully covered in the infrastructure, then I feel like there's still work to be done.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that critical assessment. So let me just ask everyone. Onyedika said that it's not good enough because of disability, right? But let's look at it on the brighter side. It's connecting rural communities. Two of these communities before now had no means of connecting to the urban center, and they've been like that for 15 years without a road to connect them to the urban center. Shouldn't we, applaud the government for at least trying to connect rural communities? What do we think? Anyone wants to go for it? Yes, please.
I think it is very good, for the government to make the way for the people to make this small and not that small, very important aspect of the completion of the infrastructure. Yeah, because there are some other people in the community that can help with that, I think. Yes, because we cannot just fold hands. We cannot just fold hands and do everything. We cannot rely. If we consider is like totally helpable in many ways, many aspects. So we cannot rely completely on it, on our government. I think my thought though, that is my thinking.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that. Does anyone else have any contribution before we discuss this case study? Just anyone else?
Okay, yes, I'd like to add a few points. So the fact that the government have made the road network, I don't think they need an applause, because it took them over 15 years to come to that point to build the road network. And if it's just two communities, so I'm thinking, how many more years will they have for other communities to also have this road network? So I don't think, I do not believe that the government should be applauded for this bare minimum.
Okay, thank you so much. You all have you've spoken in the right direction. Yes, someone speaking.
Yes, I just realized something, that they didn't have they didn't put like an audio programming system to announce like the bus stops. And so like these rural communities that have never had what do you call it, like good roads, they might not be aware that there are buses. It's like there's no good awareness system like in place for them to know that this is what the government has made available for the community.
Amazing. Honestly, you guys you've said the core of these things. In my personal opinion, I think that this is a good starting point. If I was to rate this as a project that the government has done, I'll probably rate it a 65 to 70%. I think it's a good starting point. It can be better. So this is also how we also think about infrastructure. Sometimes it's not perfect, but we can identify the gaps and say, okay, this is a good starting point, but you can do better. It can be more, like it can just be better. So personally for me, looking at this, I'm like, thank you for constructing the road. It's a good thing that you've constructed the road. It now connects like 9 communities. That's a win. So imagine that in those 9 communities, about 1,000 people live in each community. That's giving connection to about 9,000 people. That's a good starting point. And to think that out of these 9 communities, 2 of them are rural communities, that's a very good starting point. And thinking about the fact that because of this road, people who have jobs, people who have businesses, they can easily get to where they work. So that would also boost the economy. It would allow businesses to function because the road network would make that connection. And apart from just building this road, they've also developed a mass transport plan that allow people to go to work at affordable price. I think that's a good element. Like, it means that transport cost is affordable. Again, this would boost the economy, because if you're able to get to your places of work easily and at an affordable price, I think that's a good thing. However, just as Onyedika said, and Rachel has also said, we need to think about in the society, we have people who have disability, people who use wheelchairs, people who use walking stick. They need to have, those buses need a better plan to be able to allow them also to be able to use the buses. And think about if you were a blind person on the bus and you don't know your bus stop, and maybe you haven't really, like, you don't have the training for like the sort of special training that people who have visual impairments go through. So you wouldn't even know your bus stop, you would miss your bus stop. And that's why if you go to certain cities in the world, like more advanced cities, like what their bus system has is that announcement system where it announces your bus stop and tells you where you're to get down. So, just bridging the access. So I would say that this is a good starting point, but it definitely can be better. So, okay, let's go to the next case study. So this case study, I'm going to read it out and we're going to discuss, and I'll please love if we can make contributions to this. It says the Ministry of Power has announced a new hydropower plant project to be completed by 2027. That's 3 years from now. This plant, when constructed, will provide electricity to over 45 million Nigerians, as well as resolve some of the challenges with the epileptic national grid woes. In the mapping out of the project, Puerto Rico, a fictitious indigenous community, was out of coverage. Puerto Rico is home to 2,367 indigenes who have settled in this location for more than 150 years. Also, AIA, conducted by ADG, a fictitious engineering company who has been awarded the contract, discovered that in embarking on this project, over 3 million tons of carbon, what's this again? CO2 will be emitted. Let's discuss this. Is this good enough? Is this good enough? What do we think?
All right, so I do not think this is good enough, because thinking about the sustainability, the exclusion of the indigenous community who have been living in that location for over 150 years. That means I'm asking myself, have they been without electricity for over 150 years and all of that? And for the emission of the carbon dioxide, which is currently we are having discussion on climate change and how it's destroying the environment. I believe that there are other ways that we can generate electricity without causing harm to the environment, the people, and animals, nature. If the government can look into solar power, solar energy that can mitigate the effect of this emission into the environment, then that will be good enough. but having over 3 trillion tons on, no, it's not healthy. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for the citizens. And this has like long-term effects on the health of our citizens.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so because you still have the floor, let me ask a question. Even though there will be over 3 million tons of CO2 emitted into the environment if the project goes ahead, what if the government comes up or the construction company comes up with a plan to mitigate that, to reduce it to a little less than 3 trillion, or they find a way to adapt, like, this thing about climate adaptation, to like adapt effects of this climate impact, would that be okay?
Well, if yes, it will be okay, but still, we're still excluding a community, right? If we're to look at a good infrastructure, we understand that it has to be people focused, right? And so if it's not people focused, if some certain persons are still excluded from it, then we still have to address that. So it's good, but it needs to be good enough.
Thank you. So someone else, let me ask us this general question. Think about this carefully. This project is going to provide electricity to 45 million Nigerians. We are only excluding 2,367 people. They are not up to a million. Like, think about it. 45 million people will not have electricity constantly. We are excluding 2,000 plus people, which is greater. Like, let's think about it. What do we think? Shouldn't we just say, oh, well, let's go ahead with this because more people will benefit than the people who would not benefit? What do we think?
I think that's in constructing certain infrastructure, for instance, power, right? You're talking about a hydropower plant, and you realize how essential it is. The truth is, you might not really have, I'm saying this carefully, right? You might not really have one single infrastructure that might be able to meet the needs of as many people as you might originally envisage, right? So my own take would be, what is the plan for that particular community? Right? It could even be that they might not even need a hydropower plant. It could mean that what they might need, like the initial speaker said, you can look at an additional means of providing electricity for them, right? And I think that the truth is, whenever you are thinking about infrastructure, you are putting certain things in place. In as much as you might do your feasibility studies, you can realize along the way that you have missed certain steps, or you have ignored certain people, or there are some lapses and some gaps, right? So I think it's important that you know how to plug it in, know the next step to take, right? So if it means that, okay, going ahead with this project, but knowing that this particular community that has been left behind, you are doing something concurrently for them, or you are looking for another means to ensure that they get access to electricity. Because I'm just thinking about it, you can decide to bring them on, connect them to that power plant or that power supply. Sorry, I have to move around. And maybe the access to electricity that they would get might not be as constant as it would normally be if it is catered to a select group of people, right? So just understanding that, okay, you can't solve all the problems at once, but what's the roadmap for solving the remaining problems? Now, as you did this, you have identified the problem, which is good. That's the essence of doing an EIA in the first place, knowing that these are the gaps and these are the issues. Now that you have identified it, what is the next step? What is the plan that you have in place for them? So yeah, that's just it. It's a working thing, right? And that's why I think I put it in the chat box initially, that the government should be open enough to take constructive feedback. They shouldn't just say, oh, we've done this project, fold their arms and say, oh yes, good, that's going on our if we're announcing the project we have done, we've ticked this off. As long as certain things still remain outstanding, means that there's still extra work to be done. So
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I'm going to touch on this point you've just made. Isa in the chat box said that 45 million people matter. If I'm being honest, if I think about the way Nigerian electricity is, if there is a project that will automatically solve that for 45 million people, I would say fair enough, like fair enough. But just as Daniel said, there is also the thing about what you think about it. It seems good enough till you are the minority who is left behind. And then you realize that, was it really good enough? So, which brings me to exactly what Toluwani just said. Infrastructure should be a work in progress. It's not something you build once and that's the end. It can continue to progress. You can continue to adapt. You know, for those who probably don't know, EIA means environmental impact assessment. This is a process that is done at the start of most infrastructure projects or many infrastructure projects to know if we go ahead with this project, really affect the environment and the people in around it. So thinking about the situation with Costa Rica, personally, I feel like 45 million is greater. We can at least solve that. We can't solve it all at once, but we can come together, discuss with the stakeholders, like for instance, the chief of Costa Rica, because it's an indigenous community. And this is something that we sometimes do in the way we plan infrastructure in Nigeria. We forget indigenous communities. We forget rural communities. It is not good enough that infrastructure connects and enables people in urban centers. How about people at the grassroots? How about the people in the villages? We need to close that gap. And even though we might not get it all right at once, and I'm so glad that we have someone who is more experienced in infrastructure industry speak to us later on in this workshop. But we can start, it can be a good starting point, but we must continually review and plan. So I'm going to wrap this up in the next 3 minutes as our time is now fast spent. So just moving
Sorry,
ahead.
Salami. Can I just quickly add? I was just trying to process my thoughts properly, so I'm just going to wrap this up really quick. But I kind of just really wanted to address it quickly because where my mind was going really was on engagement because I feel like I know we think this is good enough, but I feel like that's also one of the issues with African communities where I think we should just be careful in the terms of how we in quotes give praises to the government because I'm here thinking the Nigerian population is over 200 million, right? As big as 45 million sounds, that's barely 21% of the entire population. And this is a national grid, right? It sounds good, and which is what uh, African countries or leaders would say, well, they did their best because 45 million sounds like a lot. But 45% of the Nigerian population experiencing a national grid is barely 21%. It's below the benchmark, right? What happens to the remaining percentage of people, right? Another thought where my mind keeps going is who was consulted? Who are the people being awarded? Who are the people who gets the benefit um from this project, right? Who are these people who on a normal day can afford generators to power their houses if there's no power, right? And then an indigenous community, I'm going to bring just randomly, I'll just say the South because I'm from the South as well, right? And you go to a place where, children barely have access to schools. Like you said in your presentation, there are so many things connected to infrastructure. Just electricity is just one of it, right? And children barely get access to schools. Businessmen and women cannot function because there's no means of creating a sustainable business because of the limitations of infrastructure that they have. So I'm thinking, who were the stakeholders that they consulted? Was this just based on the rich and the mighty again? And there are just some set of people that should benefit from this project while others can suffer and nobody will hear their voice because it's okay. They will not go on Twitter and shout that they did not get access to this infrastructure. So I think in projects like this, one thing that we can never ignore is the importance of stakeholder engagement, right? Because it just really screams that the objectives are misaligned, right? Like it appears that they powered national interest at the expense of vulnerable stakeholders, right? So to me, I'm like, this sounds good, but the conversations it's flawed, because if the right stakeholder engagement was taken into consideration, probably more thoughts would have been given into the decision being made, right? And even the environmental impact assessments too would have been properly I'm also questioning that as well, like who was consulted, right? In indigenous communities, they go through a lot of things where power, like oil, I will still use the Niger Delta, for example, like oil spillage and all of those things. We know the impact that already has on the community, right? So exploitation, and this is just among many other things that they face. So I'm really thinking it sounds like a flawed system to me. It's the benchmark and it sounds like 45 million sounds like a good amount when you hear it in numbers, right? But what happens to the remaining percentage, to the 80% of Nigerians who will not have access to the power? And do they have to wait for another 3 years before they start getting access to power supply? These things.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just following some of the conversations in the chats. Honestly speaking, you see why it is important that we are aware of these things so we can engage with the government. I'll move quickly to, letting us know. It is not news that the world with the SDGs, we are behind. As at 2023 and even 2024, only 17% of the SDGs has been on track or has been met. We have so much of the SDGs that has not been achieved. And, with the SDGs, only 17% of them being on track and only 50% has shown minimal progress. We have about 33% that has not even moved at all. And we have also like 15% of infrastructure targets that is regressing. It is not moving behind. It is not staying in one point. It is actually going backward. And this has practical implication on ICT, on electricity, on transportation, water and sanitation. It affects everything. I'm going to read a few statistics for us so that we comprehend how much this is a problem. About 675 million to 746 million people in the world do not have access to electricity in 2024. And 43% of the African population does not have access to electricity. When it comes to clean water, the UNICEF recently said that about 319 people in sub-Saharan Africa does not have access to clean water and sanitary facilities, but most importantly, reliable drinking water. And then when it comes to transportation, in Africa, about 450 million people, which is more than 70% of the total rural population, is not connected to a road network or transportation infrastructure system. So this is a big deal. This is a big deal. And so the way we approach the SDGs, we should not treat it as, oh, I'm just focusing on this goal. We should not treat it in silos. We should see it as it's a broad agenda, a broad framework. We should treat it as in achieving infrastructure development, and we've put it at the center because in achieving this, it would impact all the other goals. So sustainable success requires a holistic approach. We have to take it together. And infrastructure is important if we want to achieve all the other SDGs. We will go into our breakout room shortly, where we would be able to talk about if we were to improve infrastructure, what impact will it have on some of these goals? If we were to improve infrastructure development, for instance, how will it affect education? How will it affect gender equality? How will it affect good health and well-being? How will it affect decent work and economic growth? How will it affect even climate action? So that would even affect good governance, for instance. So we need to think about it as a broad agenda, and in achieving one, we can achieve the other. And so we know that we have a 2030 deadline. By 2030, in another 6 years, actually 5 years from 2025, the UN Agenda for Sustainable Development will be over. Can we still achieve this? I believe we can. However, it means we need to act. And what every one of us, whatever we are doing, whether you are in Borno, you're in Sokoto, you're in Abia, whatever we are doing, whether you are in England or in Germany, is important. We can achieve the sustainable development goals, but we can also fix infrastructure for this purpose. So what are the things you can do as a person? Advocacy, public participation, just as Kezia mentioned, consultation, attending town hall meetings where infrastructure development is being discussed, like as your local government area or the grassroots zone, attend, participate, be part of it. Sometimes during EIA process, when the project is launching, the government or the stakeholders would have like stakeholder meetings in the communities that are affected and have those conversations, be part of that. Raise awareness about this, just as we are doing at Infra Spotlight, where we are raising awareness. You know, we also have a project where we are creating access to infrastructure policies in Nigeria and beyond Nigeria. Participate in this process, know what the policy says, know what the law says, and because if you know what the policy says, you can hold the people involved accountable. Be part of community-led initiatives like cleanup exercises, be part of those small initiatives that happen at the community level. Also encourage transparency and accountability. Something that we're also doing at Infra Spotlight is we are tracking and monitoring government spending on infrastructure and reporting on it and saying, oh, the government isn't doing well, like they've received this amount of money from the World Bank, but they have not really utilized this money, or the project is going beyond its timeline. You know, you can hold the government accountable. You can be like a citizen watchdog. And sometimes as a citizen, you might feel like you don't have the ability to do this, but you can support non-profits like Infra Spotlight. You can support us, you can support civil society, NGOs who are doing this work by contributing your skills to ensuring that we keep the government accountable for their infrastructure promises, and that they also implement the reforms that they've committed to under certain infrastructure policies. For instance, in Nigeria has the National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan, and this is a policy that would expire by 2043, if I remember correctly. We are following up on these policies, we are following up on this project, so you can support us, even if you feel like as a citizen you don't have your own voice, but you can join this platform to be able to elevate your voices. And I hope that you have found this session very valuable. So thank you very much for listening. We will now go into our breakout rooms shortly. So to give us an understanding of what we are going to do in the breakout room is to enable us to have this conversation in smaller groups. So in your breakout room, you will discuss how infrastructure development can accelerate one SDG. We've picked out some SDG goals already. So in your breakout rooms, you'll be discussing that particular SDG. We have about I'll say 10 to 15 people online. So we would have roughly 4 breakout rooms. So I'm just going to open those breakout rooms in a minute. Okay. If we can all go into the breakout rooms. Sorry, can everyone see the breakout rooms, or is it just me?
I can't. I haven't been assigned to one yet.
Okay, just a minute. Okay, we have everyone back now. How was it? I'm just going to go around the room and ask for each group for someone to just speak. So, and I know that some teams had like lesser people. So if we go with decent work and economic growth, does anyone in that group want to tell us what they discussed in 1 minute? You have just 1 minute.
Yeah, hello everyone. So my name is Boluwatife Ajayi, and I'm from the first group that she just shared. So basically, we spoke about bad roads in Nigeria. You know how bad roads in Nigeria is actually affecting the economic power of Nigerians and making things quite expensive. Then we also discussed the aspect of decent work. So if we have better infrastructure, we would be able to have more employment opportunities. There would be, more innovation that would be able to employ other young Nigerians across the nation. So yeah, these were the key things that we actually spoke about in our group. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Then we have affordable and clean energy. Anyone from that group?
So we spoke about, first of all, the fact that we were able to identify the problem, which is in Nigeria, we don't have access to energy, that is even power, let alone clean energy, right? And we said that, first of all, identifying that we don't have enough infrastructure to even power the entire country. We don't have enough generating plants, enough distribution networks and transmission networks, right? So rather than just relying solely on the few generation companies that we have and few plants that are actually operational, it's important that it's important that new infrastructure in terms of generation, transmission and distribution infrastructure are actually put in place. That way everyone can have access to electricity and energy, right? And then in terms of clean energy as well, understanding the available natural resources that Nigeria has, one of which is the fact that based on our position on the equator, we are quite closely positioned to the sun, which means that we can leverage solar energy, right? So understanding what resources we have available and knowing that if we have good infrastructure, we can easily leverage those resources and everyone can have access to affordable and reliable electricity or energy. Yeah.
Okay, and then in 1 minute, quality education. Who wants to speak for that group?
All right, I would be speaking on behalf of quality education. So we deliberated on the leakage between infrastructure and out of school problem, and talked about how physical infrastructure have affected children and students in rural communities. We also talked about the service part of infrastructure, where we talked about digital infrastructure when it comes to quality education. There was the question of how well do our internet infrastructure in Nigeria can enable distance learning, and we all know the answer to that question. And one solution we that was suggested is mobilizing community to finance physical infrastructure in order to mitigate the out of school issue in the country.
Okay, and we have clean water and sanitation.
Okay, so I'm going to speak for my group.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, who was speaking?
I just wanted to say that there's someone that said something in the chat.
Yeah. Okay.
So can I go?
Yes.
Okay, good. So basically, we didn't really have time to talk so much because we're trying to troubleshoot a couple of things. But just to give a brief context of what we talked about very briefly. So we kind of established that clean water obviously is and sanitation are foundational for our human health and obviously our dignity, and we wouldn't all be here without even access to these basic social amenities to life. And we made a good point in understanding that it's not just even about the public health, but it's also about our social well-being as well. And millions of people around the world still lack this access to basic services and amenities, and poor water and inadequate sanitation still contribute to the spread of diseases, which obviously in turn will hinder economic growth. Looking at the pandemic, for example, and seeing the impact it had on the economy, right? Especially for women and girls too, if you link that together. But we also came to understand that to meet this SDG 6, we need to also invest and strengthen our infrastructure, not just across just one sector, like we talked about in the case study, but across urban, rural, and even peri-urban areas. So it's not just about one area, but an inclusive strengthening, right, and developing of these infrastructures. And we discussed that to do this includes us like expanding access to water through our pipelines, improving our water treatment systems, including building water, making sure water quality is safe enough, and building sanitation systems, right? And I think the conclusion for us is that what for us was that without strong infrastructure in place, achieving or providing even equitable access to these services is almost impossible. So they go hand in hand, and building infrastructure will help us meet SDG 6 of clean water and sanitation.
Thank you. And I see that Olufunke has also written that clean waters and sanitation, it would help to have a healthy society, zero tolerance to waterborne disease, and we have an improvement in the standard of living, improvement of the economy. We allow inclusiveness. Every citizen, including the impaired, will be positively affected. Thank you so much. So we'll just run now into our next session, and we have an amazing person. I'm tempted to read our entire profile. Such an incredible young woman who is doing an amazing work in infrastructure industry at the World Bank. So I ask that we all please give her a warm welcome as I bring up Sandra Ogu, who is going to be taking on this next session. Thank you so much, Sandra, and enjoy the rest of this workshop.
Okay, thank you very much, Busola, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandra. I work with the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank Group. I'm a sustainability professional, and my core experience is in social sustainability, which is gender and economic inclusion. I've done this for a couple of years, and currently I am with the Sustainable Infrastructure Advisory Team at IFC, where I manage sustainable infrastructure advisory for Nigeria, West Africa, Anglophone West Africa, and Central Africa. Today, I'll just be taking us through a session, very interactive session, where I will talk about the pitfalls of infrastructure in Nigeria, the challenges we're facing, and how we can be able to mitigate these challenges. Nigeria also happened to me a while back, a few minutes ago. I suffered from one of the pitfalls of our infrastructure, which is lack or limited digital access. So internet access is really poor here. So excuse me if my camera trips off. I've already joined with my phone. I'll speak through it, and Towoju will help me present. But just give me a second to share my screen shortly. Thank you. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Okay, great. Okay, great. So thank you. This session is, like I said, going to be very interactive, and I would just like to ask us a question. So everyone, you can unmute and just tell me how you feel, or you can drop it in the chat. So just sit back and imagine Nigeria's current state in terms of infrastructure, and just tell me the first word that comes to your mind. How do you feel when it comes to Nigeria's infrastructure currently? How do you feel? You can put it in the chat, you can unmute.
Terrible.
Okay. Okay, terrible. Despair, frustrated. Okay. Will someone concord with the frustrated? Yeah. Any other words? Disgusting. I know how that feels. Yeah. A formality. Yes. Like we're just ticking the box. Hey, I can see that most of the words subpar, most of the words, all of the words are not encouraging. All of the words are kind of reflect how we currently feel about Nigeria's infrastructure. And I will not agree, I would not disagree with you because I feel same. I'm experiencing it currently. I've experienced it some days ago. I've experienced it yesterday. And every day we keep thinking about it and wondering how we can manage this space, how we can just figure it out one way or the other. And that's why we're here today as professionals. So I would skip this slide that talks about the role of infrastructure in achieving SDG9 because Busola has extensively explained the role. And, infrastructure, like we all know, is about resilience infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and also fostering innovation. So I'll skip this, and then I'll go to the meat of the presentation to talk about Nigeria, infrastructure in Nigeria, and where we are now. The numbers on the screen are approximated numbers, and they do not look encouraging at all for me because I feel like a lot of things are going wrong. A lot of things are not right in the country in terms of transportation, energy, water and sanitation, telecommunications, and the likes. So generally, Nigeria's infrastructure sector is on a decline. I would pause for about 10 seconds or 5 seconds for us to just look at these numbers and just take it in. Just take it in while I talk through them. Thank you. So in terms of transportation, you can see that we have approximately 200,000 kilometers in Nigeria. And for paved roads, we only about 15 to 20% of our roads are paved in the country. And that's to tell you that over 80% of the road network in Nigeria is unpaved, bad, and they need some sort of repair from the government. So this is not encouraging at all. If you look at the railway, I'm based in Lagos, and I see what Lagos State is doing in terms of the blue and red lines. And while that is encouraging, we still have limited ongoing efforts to modernize and expand our railway network in Nigeria. You can imagine, like in other parts of the country, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of rail. It's not even a core transportation. It's not a core option for us in terms of transportation until recent. It has never been, and it's still not, because right now people are still taking on, like, trying to buy the idea of railway networks and utilizing the railway system for transportation. So you can imagine how backward it is for the country, so far in terms of what we've been doing. When we look at our airports, currently we have about 31 airports, 5 international, 26 domestic. For some of us, we've gone through some of these airports and we see how they need significant upgrade. There is a problem in terms of our transportation. Nigeria's transportation system needs a total overhaul, and the work needs to be done in that regard. If you look at the energy access, talks about electrification rates, rural and national. You can see the numbers are not encouraging. For power generation capacity, even though we've installed over approximately 12,500 megawatts, we use less than 4,000 megawatts for a country that has over 200 million citizens. That's not encouraging. In terms of renewable energy, we have less than 10% with significant potential for solar, wind, and hydro, which is something that we're not harnessing as a nation. For water and sanitation, previous slide. For water and sanitation, you can see that approximately 70% and 57% respectively, nationally and in the rural areas, don't have access to clean water. What happens to the other 30% in the urban areas and the other percentage in the rural areas? This is not encouraging at all. Even access to improved sanitation facilities, only about 39% in the whole country have access to improved sanitation facilities. We can see that in 2024, we still have open defecation in this country. And it's not even a very minimal rate. It's above 20%. Not looking good. For telecommunications, that's ICT, mobile operation, for mobile phone penetration rate has been good so far. We have a lot of people with access to feature phones, smartphones. It's about 94%. But what happens to the internet access? For a country as, in quotes, advanced as we are, even though I know that a lot of things are going on, internet access shouldn't be an issue for anyone. Internet access should be everywhere. It should be accessible to all. Everyone should have access to it, and we should be able to harness these things. When you look at the impact of infrastructure deficit in Nigeria's growth and development, I would pause here and just allow us maybe chime in. What do you think are some of the impacts? How has this affected you as a person, as an individual, as a professional? For some of us in the diaspora, how does this even affect you and maybe family back here in Nigeria? What are the things that, what are you concerned about? I just want to hear your thoughts for a few minutes before I proceed. So please feel free to unmute your mic, feel free to chime in the chat box. Happy to listen and discuss here. Thank you. Anyone? Feel free to jump in. Just talk to me about how this has impacted you as a person, your work, everything. Just share your thoughts with me. Are we thinking about it, or Sola, do you have something to say in this regard?
I think one that I can easily think about is just being in university, and it's every time there's an exam that the transformer is bad. And that's a significant impact for me, or like during COVID and working from home for the very first time, and just there being no power supply to even charge your laptop to even do the work, because there was a pandemic and we could not all go out to do things, or food you've kept in the freezer just spoiling because there is no power to keep them fresh and refrigerated. So I think that's one impact that I've seen with power supply, and with the infrastructure as a Nigerian.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
Hi. So I just want to briefly share my experience as a public servant. A lot of times, so whether it's fuel scarcity or security issues, it has really affected productivity at work. It literally brings down the whole institution, in the sense that people do not come to work. People close very early. I mean, we already know, in the public service, we know how work ethics is there already. People are very nonchalant and very relaxed. But you also find that in situations where there's tension, so issue of fuel scarcity, there's no access to even. So we've had situations where, because of first of all, there's no light, and then trying to get the generator on, and then you have diesel issues. There's no diesel, and I mean, these are situations where we're partnering with international organizations, and then there's no light to carry out. So it's the whole infrastructure issue affects productivity. It affects attitude to work. It gets really frustrating. And yeah, so that's my experience.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I think for me, I would look at accessibility of facilities. One of the challenges I've had is going to to a building that is over 20 floors and above, and I'm mandated to use the staircase. And you see some of these buildings, they design it beautiful exterior, plant small grass outside and tell you it's environment friendly, and you have to go 20 floors of staircase. And if mistakenly they have an elevator, God help you if you use the elevator and come out in one piece. So that's one. Another one I've never understood is why, and I've seen it in 2 states now, where the road is very small, and then you find this, I'm trying to find the word, this extremely large bridge there. And I'm like, why? And you are mandated to climb that bridge, walk over 1 hour on a bridge. Meanwhile, you needed something just to take you to the other side. I've never understood why such bridges are always built, and why citizens like myself are put through that kind of stress. I've even asked friends who construct. I'm like, why? What is the need? I've not gotten any explanation to date. I don't even want to start talking about our roads, because it's like similar to the bridge. Some roads, you don't understand why there's 10 lanes on a road that can be 2 lanes, and the road that needs 10 lanes is then 2 lanes. And you're like, okay, really interesting. So probably you'd help us make sense of why.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Before I continue, it's okay. Someone says, Deborah says, as regards keeping in touch with loved ones who live in Nigeria, poor network is a hindrance sometimes. True, I agree. And thank you all for sharing your thoughts. This will make sense why this happens. I have my own personal conviction as to why this happens, and I'll share that with you. And then maybe you'd also either agree or disagree with me, but I'd love to hear from you. So moving on to the impact of infrastructure deficit on Nigeria's growth and development, I took some snapshots of some of the news online, and you can see people not having access to clean water that's through polluted river in Enugu State, motorists lamenting about bad roads, collapsed bridges that are disconnecting states. The popular one now, which is national grid collapse, every time we experience that. And then there is digital exclusion. We have millions of Nigerians cut off by poor internet infrastructure in Nigeria. And looking at the impact overall, look at the economic impact. It has led to increased transportation costs and delays for importation. Also, when you move goods from one part of the country to another, it takes weeks. This thing affects the economy. If people get, it's like a ripple effect. So it keeps going on and on and on. In terms of the poor roads, the power outages, social impact, people have limited access to essential services as healthcare and education. It reduces their quality of life, lack of clean water, sanitation as well. If you look at the rural areas, in terms of their quality of life, they have poor infrastructure, which restricts them to access schools and hospitals. So this is like the impact of Nigeria's current infrastructure state on the country. For digital divide, we've talked about that. Everything is it's restricting everyone from access to information and opportunities. I was reading some time ago when someone talked about how he got a job with an international organization, and when they asked him about his location, he probed further, and he mentioned that he's based in Nigeria, and he lost the opportunity to go on with that job because they felt that the bandwidth of the country was not commensurate to what they needed for their company. So this is just to tell you how this thing affects us generally in terms of our overall development as well. If you look at infrastructure, investments, we don't have investors coming into the country because the infrastructure itself, it hinders economic activities and investments. By the time we rely heavily on generators, it increases our operating costs as business owners. And over time, because we have a lot of operating costs, we cannot keep a lot of people in jobs, so they lose their jobs. So it kind of affects every other part of the SDGs. And you see that everything is interconnected, everything works together, and infrastructure is a very important part. It has a very important part to play in this regard. If, in terms of social inequality, you see that there are gaps, gender gaps, social inequalities, people in underserved areas do not have access to these things. So this is like the impact, overall impact of infrastructure deficit on our country's growth and development. And when we look to the challenges that this presents, for the challenges, I grouped it into 4 challenges, and this is where I'll talk about where, you mentioned about the bridges, why are they built in some kind of funny ways, and how can why is this happening? So first, in terms of funding, we know that there is a shortfall in funding for infrastructure projects, difficulty in securing long-term financing for large-scale projects. So as a professional with the IFC, so to clarify, IFC deals with the private sector, while the bank side, which is International Bank for Development and Resettlement, which is what everybody knows as World Bank, deals with the public sector. I've realized from my experience with the private sector that there's always difficulty in securing long-term financing for large-scale projects. The private sector is unable to take this on. The economy is not encouraging them. So a lot of times we even find it very difficult to invest in these businesses, so to help them set up projects, infrastructure projects within their communities and the likes. While I was in the group on the group for economic, I don't know, what did you talk about? Yeah, economic development group. Yeah, we were talking about some of the amazing things some of private sector people are doing in the country. And then someone mentioned Azura Edo power plant in Benin City, and I concurred because I understand what they are doing there in terms of infrastructure, ensuring people have access to verticals like education, clean water, and the likes. Azura Edo is doing amazing. They've even gone beyond, managing their immediate community, which is in Benin City, and moving up north to build schools, roads, give people access to clean water in that area, and sanitation and all of that. But that is just Azura Edo. We need more private sector organizations to secure long-term financing for these projects. And the problem I have seen in terms of funding gaps is that some of them are not equipped with the right they don't have the appropriate requirements, or they don't meet up to the requirements to access these funds. And this is where the government comes in terms of policy and regulatory issues for them. There's frequent changes in policy. There's no continuity in the government programs. Once the government changes power or changes hands, we realize that a lot of things just go wrong and they are back to zero. And this has reflected in cumbersome regulatory processes, which is delayed project implementation, and it's delaying project implementation. So that's a very huge challenge for us. In terms of capacity constraints, now, when we talk about these bridges and maybe the government building bridges and roads for people and they don't get the specifications properly, or it just looks disjointed, a lot of times I tie it to the technical expertise and the managerial capacity of the public sector. I believe that the public sector we have a challenge in ensuring that the professionals are properly trained and ensuring that they are professionals in the field sorry. ensuring that there are professionals in infrastructure development. The government, the public sector is such that everyone just comes in. People have little to no expertise in that field, and it has affected us greatly. So I think that is a challenge. Some of them also have like poor management, project management skills, poor technical skills. So when you have these bridges, there is nobody, literally nobody is monitoring properly or trying to monitor what is being done in terms of infrastructure when you talk about roads. And I think it transcends to other aspects of sustainable infrastructure in the country, that we don't have proper monitoring and regulatory systems in place. The people the people that are in charge are not equipped with the right knowledge to understand that, okay, there are forward thinking ways to go about these things. The world is moving. These are case studies you can adapt. These are things that are going on in the world, in Africa as well. These countries are moving better than these ones. There is a lot of capacity constraints, and I cannot leave this slide without talking about corruption and governance issues. It has been overflogged and it cannot be overemphasized. There is misallocation of funds, which has resulted in embezzlement, mismanagement of project budgets. Let me give a personal experience. So, this road between, I don't know, for those of us that have lived in Lagos, there is a major road linking Lagos to the border. That's Benin Republic, right? I don't know if anyone's aware of that stretch, mile 2, that stretch. Are you aware of that road? Maybe for those of us that know Lagos, yes,
I'm
you
aware.
are. Yes, you're aware. Now, it's interesting to note that when that road was being constructed, I think that road construction started about sometime in 2009 or 2007 or 2008.
Fashola's tenure.
Yeah, Fashola's tenure. I remember. And till date, it has not been completed. Till date, most of the infrastructure, some of them are already dilapidated. Some of them already need, they are already repairing some parts of the road. So you can imagine how corruption has led to this kind of thing happening. If you look at corruption and governance issues again, access to water in rural areas, it's sad to see that even in urban cities, in communities around us, we still have people struggling with defecation. That shouldn't be, because I feel like the government, a lot of people have misappropriated funds, embezzlement. So these things have resulted in limited transparency, accountability in project execution and the likes. So that's why, like Busola said, she encouraged all of us to, talk the talk, walk the walk, be involved in all of these things, ask questions, and hopefully things will change from that perspective. So the next slide, in terms of my proposed remedies and solutions, I matched it with the challenges that we had. I would encourage public-private partnerships. The government needs to work with private sector to leverage their expertise in implementing some of these infrastructure projects and sustainable infrastructure programs. Working with the private sector already has the expertise. The public sector has the money. If they work together, I believe that things can be better. We can have successful projects like in transportation, in energy sectors, good successful projects, especially in renewable energy. I think there's a lot to be done in that space, which is it's not really harnessed for us in Nigeria. And in terms of funding and investment, we can also explore alternative financing options. There are green bonds, there are grants that can be explored as well in this regard. For strengthening policy and regulatory framework, I believe we can establish a sustainable master plan with clear goals and timelines. Even though we would say, oh, Nigeria has something, we have some master plan, we have something we're working with. Is it sustainable? Does it transcend beyond the government? Does it transcend beyond change of power? So these policies and regulatory frameworks need to be in place. In terms of policy and regulatory frameworks as well, we need to implement certain policies that encourage the private sector to be more involved in infrastructure development for the country. You might argue that maybe the private sector, maybe they're overwhelmed with their own operating costs, but I believe that it begins with us around our environment. By the time we're able to have that stakeholder engagement where in our communities, we're able to relate with the people in our communities, understand their needs and implement as required, we'll see that the government will be more willing to also join the bandwagon and get on projects with us as well. For capacity building and enhancing skills, I think that the government should invest in training programs for their employees, and professional development for the private and public sector. This is really important. Project management skills for them as well, and the likes is equally important. And in terms of addressing environmental and social issues, I believe that we can explore using like eco-friendly materials and technology in construction. We can also explore engaging with the local communities, like I mentioned earlier, understand their needs and ensure that their concerns are addressed. For environmental and social issues, the world is moving, things are changing. We need to keep ourselves abreast of what's happening in the world globally. We need to keep ourselves abreast of what's happening even within Africa, how countries are leaving us behind and moving ahead with development, giving their countries like, yeah, I don't know how to put it in a sentence, but some of these countries are leaving us behind. We have as much as South Africa has been way ahead of us, other countries are coming up. You can see Rwanda is doing very good. You can see Botswana as well in terms of their infrastructure, in terms of access to social inclusion, environmental and social concerns. Some of these countries are doing very well. And I think that we can also emulate and implement some of these practices, best practices from the countries. This is the end of my slide in terms of proposed remedies and solutions. I'm happy to receive questions from you, clarification on sustainable infrastructure in Nigeria and beyond, and how we can manage this, even especially in terms of funding, in terms of partnerships, public-private partnerships, and all of that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandra. That was an awesome session. And if you have questions, please kindly unmute, or you can just put it in the chat box and I'll read it out and Sandra can, answer the questions for us. Thank you so much. Questions, anybody? I'm guessing nobody has questions.
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question for Sandra, and this is coming from, we work more in the third sector, but like Sandra's experiences are more aligned to like the private sector. And my question is just really around, do you see like a partnership somewhere between the third sector, the private sector, and how like both sectors can like align together to address some of the challenges you've raised? I know you touched on public-private partnership between private sector and government, but also where do you see the place of NGOs and civil society to like contribute to some of the solutions that you have raised?
Thank you, Busola. So for NGOs and civil society, as much as I touched on PPP, that's public-private partnerships, they are also not left out in this because they can leverage the influence of the private sector to work with the government. As an NGO, if you own an NGO and you're developing something in your space, you can reach out to some of the private sector organizations. A lot of them have strong, no, I won't call them CSR, but a lot of them have strong sustainability frameworks that encourage partnerships with the NGOs. And I would encourage you to leverage that opportunity, work with them. Happy to share some organizations that I'm aware of that are huge on this and that you can reach out to intermittently for different aspects in terms of your interest and what you're looking to do. While working with, so the third sector and the public sector, that's the government, it might be far-fetched. I know that the government works with the third sector a lot, but in terms of making impacts, I'm a strong believer in the private sector. I feel like there's a lot to be done. The private sector has like the expertise, they have the funds sometimes, and they're able to work closely with you to implement some of these initiatives. Yeah, there's a lot there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I don't know if anyone else has a question, but I will just take the opportunity to ask one more question. And my question is more around, there's this skepticism that as citizens that we often have about the private sector being a business. Like, how do you navigate that in the work you do? How do you, like, personally, when people hear about companies, private sector, you're like, oh, these people are going to take our homes, they will demolish our homes to build roads, they just want to make profit, they just care about profit. So like, how do you navigate that, building public trust, even in advising private sector on infrastructure?
So I'll speak from my experience as a core private sector professional who has worked in private sector literally all her career, private and now with the International Development Organization. Currently with IFC, we have systems in place to ensure that this doesn't happen. And when we're working with the private sectors, this is like a requirement from us to see that their E&S practices are standardized, and that even in terms of sustainable development, sustainable stakeholder engagement, impact engagement with their communities, we ensure that people are not disgruntled, because it impacts our investments too. As an organization that invests hugely in the private sector, we see that so let me give you like a scenario. If the company, so for example, a power plant in maybe Asaba, we're trying to invest in them. If the community is not happy, it impacts the operational standpoint of the company, right? And in turn, these companies would not be able to pay us back. So for us, it's like a requirement. We need to ensure that these things are in place, and it's not as bad as you think it is when you say, oh, the private sector is just for business. Right now, they are gearing up. They realize that SDGs are like part of their business. And a lot of them, for example, they have like social inclusion policies in place, even for their employees as well, to ensure job creation. They have community engagement and stakeholder engagement policies for them, for their communities in place. In terms of infrastructure as well, they have some policies in place to ensure that these things are working, because the international organizations are watching. And if you do not align with all of these things, the probability of us investing in you is very slim. So yes, we are huge on that. There is a question from Daniel. He says, corruption and misappropriation of funds are issues that continue to hinder sustainable development of Nigeria's infrastructure. Do you think external international funding organizations like the World Bank are doing enough to ensure funds they release or lend are utilized appropriately? Yes, we are. our organization is so structured that we do not want to be in the bad light. And I'm not speaking about this it's not from a selfish perspective. We do not want to be in the bad light. We do not want, and every fund utilized is also monitored by another organization. So I will tell you for a fact. So every fund we give out to maybe like the government or the private sector is equally monitored by a third party organization, a third party country somewhere else. So we have to ensure that these monies are utilized properly. However, I know that there is corruption in place. I know that it's easy for people to say, oh, we just gave out the funds and I mean, we're done. We've given out the money. Whatever you use it for is none of our business. But then we need to realize that the government actually shares reports with us and they back this up with evidence. And I mean, when these things are backed up with evidence, there is a limit for us in terms of confirming these things. While we can confirm some of these things, they come up with the reports, they give us the evidence, they tell us this is what it is, this is what has been done. And it's a challenge, and it's still an existing challenge in terms of monitoring the utilizations of these funds. Do we do our own independent assessment? Yes, we do. We even employ consultants to do these things. We go there ourselves, we go there on site. For example, we invested in one of the power plants in Nigeria, and just about 3 weeks ago, I took a trip to the plant itself to see for myself that the funds were being utilized properly, and also see, because in like sustainable infrastructure advisory, to see that they are, besides building the plant and doing what they want to do in their business, they are making the communities happy. They're implementing these things, because if they are not, it impedes their opportunity to receive investments from us in the future. So a lot of these organizations are very careful about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Okay, so I believe that we do not have any more questions for Sandra, but if you have any other question, general question for Busola, or any question particularly, we have a lot of people here that can, answer your questions. So if you have any question, please ask now, and you can also put it in the chat box, and we will attend to that. Any question at all, not particularly for Sandra now.
Sorry, if I can just ask one more question also to Sandra.
Okay.
When it comes to the private sector, and I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but like, is it more around the Nigerian private sector in the infrastructure scene in Nigeria, or like, are they foreign companies? And like, basically, how do you do it? Like, do you work more with Nigerian companies building infrastructure, or foreign companies? And when it's foreign companies, do you have like some set of rules also for how they should operate in the country? Like following some set of laws and regulation for how they build in the country, knowing that they are foreigners?
Yes, we do. So in terms of our like engagements with Nigerian owned companies and then foreign companies, we work with all different kinds of companies. So we are not biased in terms of their structure. However, we have certain systems in place to ensure that they align with our requirements. So it's a free space for everyone. If the Nigerian companies meet up, that's fine. If the foreign companies meet up, that's fine. Before we invest in any of these companies, we go through checks. We go through about 3 intense checks with the companies. We look at their finances. We look at something called integrity due diligence. I think I should touch base on this, integrity due diligence, because the reason why some of the Nigerian companies do not receive a lot of investments from us is because of this particular thing, IDDs. A lot of these companies have affiliations with some politicians, some people who have gone through some corruption issues. There is an organization currently that I've questioned why we can't work with them. And the only reason a colleague of mine gave me is because just one person on the board is into like lotto, which is something that we are against. Yeah. So these things kind of the Nigerian companies are at, they're at a disadvantage when it comes to these things. And that's why overall I'll encourage people, maybe if you're starting your own company, if you're starting your own business, please do your checks, because a lot of times you don't know when these things would come to play. We go deep to the grassroots, we check everything. And IDDs are very important for us. Their investments, their financials, their even to the how they treat their employees is very important for us in investments. We ensure that their employees are treated properly, they have good policies. Things like childcare is accessible for staff, things like having like 3 months maternity leave, we're trying to push to 6 months. So these are things that companies can put out there. Also, another thing that we look out for is transparency. How transparent are these organizations? What do we see online? What are they putting out there about themselves? So it's good to be transparent as well. And then for NGOs, I would encourage you to be as transparent as possible with your finances, with everything, because a lot of times we tend to work with private sector companies and then the NGOs as well. It depends on what we're trying to implement at that point. So these are like little things that we look out for when we're selecting organizations that we want to invest in or work with. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So is that your last question? All right, that's great. Okay, thank you so much, Sandra. I think with that, I can say we have come to the end of your session. Thank you so much for an insightful time. I'm sure everyone has learned one thing or the other that they can, make good use of. Right, thank you so much. So this is the final call for questions. Yes, this is the final call for questions. Any questions before we wrap up? Okay, no question in there. All right, so we are going to take a screenshot of the, let's say, of everybody here. I think we're doing that right about now, right? Okay, so if you can turn on your video, please do so. You can turn on your video, please kindly do so so that we can take a picture, a screenshot rather. Thank you, thank you. Okay. Nobody's turning on their video. All right. Okay, so we are finally come to the end of day one, and I am super excited for how it has gone. Right. Thank you guys so much for your active participation. It was an amazing time conversing with each and everyone on here. Today's day one, day two is tomorrow. We cannot wait to have everybody back here and our two other facilitators for tomorrow and our moderators and every participant. But in the meantime, please do well to follow us on all our socials at Infra Spotlight for more updates from today and for tomorrow and for subsequent projects. Once again, thank you guys so much for joining in. This is, should I say, a dream come true? But yes, thank you so much for joining in. We're going to take, okay, we have more videos on. Amazing. We're going to take the screenshots now. And yeah, over to you, Bisola. Okay.
Okay, I've taken one, except more people are coming on camera. Then I'll take another one. So,
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Yeah. Okay, that's it. Thank you, guys.
All right. Okay, thank you, everyone. That will be all for today. See you tomorrow, same time. Thank you guys
Thank
so much for
you.
joining in.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.